So was I surprised? I would say when looking at the numbers and our objective analysis, no, I was not surprised. However, emotionally, I think I was a little bit, because there was a part of me that thought that there would possibly be some dirty tricks. Possibly they would not let him win. And when the election was called, Tom will remember, my eyes just started welling up with tears instantly, because I think emotionally I was a little bit shocked that it was too big to rig.
False fear motivates some people, but they wake up quick and they lose trust. And so suddenly it's like the little child story of the boy who calls wolf, right? Suddenly you can't use it. And I think by the end of the election cycle, they were attempting to use terrible words that have a horrible history, like Nazi, which personally was offensive to me, because I said, you're using Nazi in a casual way when school children should be reading about it in history and regard that word with horror. And you're using it so casually that it's losing its historical meaning. So when you have to run on fear, remember, fear and hyperbole is how you say, not Trump. I'm not Trump. And fear, when you don't have a position, you only have fear and demagoguery.
Tom Ellsworth is an experienced CEO, executive mentor, and author. He's also a panel member of the Patrick Bet David, or PBD Podcast, and also hosts his own podcast, the BizDoc Podcast. Amy Dangerfield is an Australian-born social and political commentator, now based in the United States. She's also in charge of media distribution at Valuetainment. Amy and Tom, thanks so very much for joining us. Can we begin by saying, where are you coming to us from in America for the benefit of listeners and viewers?
We're in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale, which for those people in Australia, maybe not completely familiar with Florida, it's north of Miami and significantly south of Orlando, which is in the center of the state.
Great.
We're right here on the Atlantic Ocean.
Yes.
Well, there you go. And I'm from northwest New South Wales, out in the bush. Modern technology means bush is an Australian expression for country, for those who are not from Australia listening to this. Can I begin by asking whether either of you are surprised by the election outcome and why you think Trump actually won so convincingly?
So, we had been analyzing the data for 3 months leading into the election, and for Tom, probably much longer than that. And, week by week, we started to see that things were looking more and more in Trump's favor when we were analyzing the polls, at least the credible ones, because there is a way to discern the credible pollsters from the ones who are mostly doing it with an agenda to paint a certain picture. So was I surprised? I would say when looking at the numbers and our objective analysis, no, I was not surprised. However, emotionally, I think I was a little bit, because there was a part of me that thought that there would possibly be some dirty tricks. Possibly they would not let him win. And when the election was called, Tom will remember, my eyes just started welling up with tears instantly, because I think emotionally I was a little bit shocked that it was too big to rig. And whatever dirty tricks they did try to play, not saying that they definitively did, but if they did try to pull any tricks, it wasn't enough for them to sway the election.
I think I was surprised at two moments in the election. One was on election night, but one was 2 months before, when Joe Biden, it was very clear, was pushed out of the race by combination of the Democrat National Committee, which is the organizing committee of the Democrat Party that he's a member of. He's a Democrat president, as well as other key members of his own government, most notably Nancy Pelosi. He was summarily really pushed. And now we have all of the evidence of how the celebrities at the time that were saying, oh, you're wanting me to get together big fundraisers in Hollywood, like George Clooney, a very successful actor, very wealthy actor, had very wealthy friends throughout Hollywood, was asked to do some bundling and pull together other wealthy people to support the campaign, for Biden, and then was out there going, gosh, he's really changed in 6 months. I'm not really sure about this. I was surprised to see how well organized this effort to remove Biden from the campaign so that he would back out as the candidate, how organized that campaign was. I was very, very surprised. Then I was surprised on election night, seeing how quickly everything that we thought based on the numbers and everything was coming true. We didn't know if there were going to be truckloads of mail-in ballots, and maybe those ballots are real and maybe they weren't. We were just waiting for the dirty tricks. And we were waiting for this, but all of a sudden it went like three dominoes falling. Pennsylvania became clear. North Carolina became clear. Georgia became clear. And the mathematics on those three, plus Alaska, all the rest of the states that were very, very blue or very, very red, it was going to be a win for Trump at that moment, regardless of what happened in New Mexico, Nevada, which is Las Vegas, and Arizona, which is Phoenix.
And Wisconsin, the rest of the blue wall as well, Wisconsin.
Even assuming Wisconsin and Michigan were blue, if Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia went, then you only needed Alaska with the rest of the states that were like Texas. That was never going to be for Kamala Harris, and New York was never going to be for Donald Trump, although it was much closer.
Much closer.
And so I was surprised to see that we were at midnight, 1 a.m., declaring a president when I think everyone was ready for 2 weeks of debate and figuring it out. I don't know what the international feeling was. I'd love to hear what your feeling was, sir, and what you were thinking internationally, but that was surprising to me that we were at 1 a.m. and we were the first news organization, and we're a podcast. We're not a news organization, is not our day job. We're a podcast, but we invested heavily in all of the technology and in the data collection systems so that we could see all of the votes as counted by the Secretary of States of each of the 50 U.S. states. And we wanted to get it right. And we didn't want to go out on a limb and saying, well, I hope Manchester United wins. Yeah, they're going to win. You're a fan. You're talking into it. No, we wanted to see the data and we wanted to see the votes and we wanted to be sure. And we had all that in place. What was the rest of the world thinking? Were you expecting an election decision in the U.S. election on election night? Or were you thinking that it might be protracted with counting mail-in votes and all these other things that were bandied about on the media so extensively in U.S. media coverage?
It's a very interesting question. I probably have a slightly different perspective because I had so long in public life myself and have a little bit of a feel, I thought I did anyway, for how things were flowing. So my view was that the misleading of the American people by the Democrat machine from the president down about his true state would have been a disaster for the Democrats. I had a conversation with an American taxi driver who wanted to tell me how terrible Trump was. And then I said, just quietly, because I felt I was in another country, I should be careful. I said, but if I were an American, I would feel very angry about the way the Democrats hid the truth from me as a voter. And he said, yeah, I take that point. He said, that's a fair point. I should be angry about that. Well, what did the rest of the world think? I think here in Australia would be fairly typical. We were fed an absolutely relentless, monotone menu of loathing of Trump, loathing of the Republicans, admiration for all things Democrats. And that was showing in the polling about who Australians thought should win. As someone who'd been involved in public life for a long time, I thought this is nuts because no one's actually balancing this and explaining what's really happening in America and why, for example, the Americans, this was never pointed out in the Australian media, why so many Americans are so deeply offended by the way the Democrat machine held the truth from the American people about the real state of their president, which, by the way, couldn't have happened in our system. An English or Australian style parliamentary democracy the leader of the nation has to appear in Parliament, and in particular, question time whenever the Parliament sits. So you know straight away whether they're on top of their game or not. But this was hidden from the American people. It was hidden globally. And I think that really distorted our understanding of what was happening. Mm-hmm. I thought that was going to be a major factor in America, frankly. Am I right? How did you see it?
Yeah, I mean, it should have, right? I mean, when people realized, and it was publicly admitted, that yes, Biden's mental decline was actually something very serious. It wasn't just a Republican talking point, but it was extremely evident when Trump did that debate with him. That really should have been enough to set the dominoes in place and make people really start to discern and question whether the narrative that they were being sold was true or not. But, as we saw, many people just followed the narrative when they switched it over to Kamala, the first female president, the first female Black president. They know all of the talking points to use and the rage bait to use to incite people to go along with their narrative. And I guess you can just never really underestimate the power of liberal talking points and a really strong narrative, I guess, because a lot of people were deluded.
And there were people over here now, there are more moderate celebrities that are saying things. And the reason I say that is these more moderate celebrities, they're very liberal, but they're slight toward the moderate. They're talking about how upset they are, that they gave millions of their dollars. And were told that Kamala was ahead in the polls. Mm-hmm. And then we're told that this was good to go. And then seeing the news reports that are coming from the Democrat side about the waste. You've seen these things about the spending and how they owe $20 million right now to vendors. They laid off all of these Democrat staffers that were part of a work union that was supporting the Democrat Party, laid off the day after the election, no severance, no everything. People are seeing that now, and and Democrats are deeply offended by the aftermath of saying, wait a minute, we were gathering money for you. You were saying that all of your stats that it just took a little more, we're going to get there. And so they were shocked. And I think what was also shocking now to look back is in the midst of that, you have some of those celebrities have come out and said, yeah, the hints we were given was that there were forces in the Democrat Party that wanted Biden to debate Trump in early July. They wanted that debate because they figured how it would go, and it would give them the spark to light the fire to pull back his candidacy, because his wife, Jill Biden, was refusing to discuss it at any level. Mm-hmm. That they went to him and saying, in June, you should withdraw. And Jill's like, he's not withdrawing. And she and the people that were there, the shadow government behind Biden, had no part of it. And there are forces that this is coming from the Dems, not coming from Fox News, not coming from News Corp, not coming from the New York Post, inside Democrat donors and people that are saying, yeah, we later heard that the summer debate was pushed on Biden. Oh, you'll kill him. It'll be great. You're going to wipe up Trump. And yet it was so glaring that Biden was tricked into that by members of his own party. So he would look bad, and they had what they needed to start the campaign to remove his candidacy. Mm-hmm. And so I think about that, and I think that is horrifying to me from the side that was saying Trump's a threat to democracy. Really, what just happened to democracy for the candidate that went through the primaries that had thousands of people that were volunteering in the primaries, and Biden was their candidate fair and square, and he was removed in a coup? I look back at that and I was shocked. So I put that above what I saw in the Democrats flooding the media. I put what I called the coup. I call it the coup in the middle of summer above that, because if you're going to do that, don't you go to the convention and say, we've got 4 noble candidates, Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, and saying we're going to have a old style convention so that the people can be represented and select their candidate. That's not what happened.
Again, just to make the point, it's very interesting. It could never happen in Australia, for the benefit of my Australian listeners and so forth. Just a point that people might not have focused on, simply because the leader of our country, our Prime Minister, has to appear regularly in question time, amongst other things, and answer questions from the opposition, from the other side of politics. And you know straight away whether they're on their game or not. You could never have hidden from the Australian people, or for that matter, the British people, probably the Canadians or even the New Zealanders. I'm not trying to set up a good guy, bad guy. I'm just saying it's an interesting aspect of this campaign that highlights the difference between the two different models, the presidential model, the prime ministerial Western British or style democracy, where the Prime Minister can't avoid ongoing daily scrutiny. It's impossible, so that people know, and it has a major impact on the outcome. Amy, you said something that was very interesting, if I could return to it for a moment, and that was, we know that the media take positions and that they are biased, and we all know who stands for what, and we know that American, in your language, media is overwhelmingly liberal or left-wing, overwhelmingly progressive, that word that they've used, I think, stolen almost. But what about the polling? Because there are strong suggestions. Well, it must have been gingered. Some of it was so wrong. Towards the end, we started to see polling saying, oh, no, it's a big swing back to Kamala, which to me didn't make sense, because my view of it was that when Kamala was forced to go public and do some open interviews, it all fell apart. And that was not played out in Australia and around the rest of the world. We didn't see those performances, but what it revealed was somebody who had no idea of what she wanted to do as president. And the only real clues came from her record and the fact that she came from California and had supported every progressive cause known in California.
Yeah, and she came from a middle-class family, right? That's apparently the only important piece of information she wanted to get across. But when it comes to the polling, Tom's the one who taught me everything I know when it comes to looking at pollsters, analyzing them. So he could probably answer a little bit more in depth. But there are certain grades of pollsters, and you're able to look back to previous election cycles and see the margin and degree of accuracy from one pollster to another. So, for example, week over week, we would always show Rasmussen daily reports whenever we were referring to the national poll, because historically throughout these elections, they have been a very reputable pollster that has always landed within the top 3. Likewise, for Atlas Intel, whenever they release new polls, whether it be a poll on the popular vote or whether it be a poll for the swing states, we always refer to them because they were number 1. And you start to realize, okay, why are certain pollsters more accurate than others? There's many factors that go into it, but a lot of it goes down to the sampling. You know, if they are oversampling Democrats, for example, if they're oversampling women, which we know, statistically speaking, usually lean progressive or Democrat, that is likely to result in a certain outcome. So oftentimes these pollsters conduct this research with a certain end in mind that they want to be able to show. And so they structure the process in a way that will yield those results, if that makes sense. Tom can probably explain it a little bit better.
Yeah, we saw 4 categories of pollsters. We saw the ones that were straightforward and turned out to be correct. And that was Rasmussen, Atlas Intel, Rich Barris, the People's Pundit, those folks. Category 2, the ones that I think meant well, but were not very good pollsters professionally. Category 3, the ones that were in it for the buck and would mysteriously take dollars from the RNC or the Kamala Harris campaign, hundreds of thousands of dollars a week for polling, and give them the polls that they wanted. Oh, you're looking close in Pennsylvania and North Carolina and Arizona. Oh, it's looking close. But the internal polling by the experts inside Kamala Harris's campaign said they never had her ahead of Trump throughout the summer. So they would get those polls and then they would feed those polls to the media. This just in, the ABC Ipsos poll shows Kamala Harris leading in 3 of the swing states this evening. And it made for good. And they were using that news coverage as campaign ads. You see that? They take the pollster goes the way that they know they want, and then the pollster gets their name read on by the news presenters in a credible way. They get a big check from the campaign, and then the campaign gets a campaign ad that sounds like there's enthusiasm and promise for Harris to get people out. The fourth group of pollsters are the outright frauds and the ones that were just absolutely fraudulent. Mm-hmm. If I don't know if Australia showed it, but did you catch the Iowa pollster 3 days before the election, this Midwest red state, Iowa, suddenly Kamala Harris leading by 3. And it was a very big poll coming out 72 hours before Election Day. Did that coverage reach Australia in the main news?
And it was very, very big news. And it does affect you psychologically. You think, oh, gee, wow, it must be on. Something dramatic's happened and the American psyche, all those undecided people have decided at the last moment to go for Kamala. Presumably that's what we were meant to believe. And presumably, in terms of another comment Amy made, was that meant to G up all of those celebrities in inverted commas and so forth? Come on, we just need a bit extra. Give us a bit more. We can lock this in. Was it meant to do that? Because if it was, that's a terrible reflection on the pollsters. It's a terrible reflection on the mainstream media. And I'll be blunt, it's not a very good reflection on all those celebrities who have an overblown view of their own importance.
Yeah. And that pollster, the woman who ran that pollster, the actual results in Iowa, when the votes were counted, 13-point victory for Donald Trump, meaning she was 16 points wrong. Mm-hmm. Now, people have asked, did she get it wrong at the hands of media who wanted that poll? Or did she just do a horrible job? Mm-hmm. So was she category 4, an outright fraud? Or was she category 3, maybe leaning into it to get her name and to get the check for next week? Mm-hmm. Well, the backlash on her was so severe, she retired from polling at the end of the week after the election. And so there are some that feel that she was heavily influenced, went along with it, but the slapdown was so severe afterwards, and that there were people that put pressure on her to basically retire from professional polling. So she's closed up her shop.
Yeah. And one more thing I will note just very quickly is, we mentioned that we were a little bit scared that they would possibly try to pull some dirty tricks, and there's various ways that they could do that. But this narrative of, it's really close, this would then support them taking 2 weeks to be able to count all of the ballots. Because if it wasn't an extremely tight race, then there would be no reason for them to drag this on an extra 2 weeks. But the fact of the matter is, despite all of this propaganda, it didn't work. It was too big to rig. And so all of their efforts were in vain.
This might surprise you, Tom, but just in terms of what you've both said, I actually had a bit of sympathy for the pollsters, because it's very apparent to me that, and this is happening in Australia too, quite often the pollsters are confronted by people who are actually not going to tell them what they're really going to do. This says something about the censoriousness, let me be blunt here, about the progressive cause. People say, oh, no, I'll end up my name will be on a list if I dare to tell this pollster what I really think. Or my friends who think politically correctly when I don't think politically correctly will never talk to me again. So as a woman, I'm going to say I'm voting for Kamala, but I get inside the ballot box and actually vote for Trump. Does that in itself make it really hard for pollsters to call it right? Maybe it's partly tied to what you were saying about the polling companies that are trusted and those that are not. Integrity, again, comes to the fore, do you think?
Well, there is also a reality that was happening as the summer wore on, that the Trump voters were actually lying because they were so tired of being interrupted at dinner with phone calls to their mobiles from pollsters. And there were some of them that were saying, well, I'm neutral, I'm undecided, maybe I like RFK. And subsequently, he joined with Trump. And the Democrats did everything they could to keep him on the ballot because they thought that he would take votes from Trump. As if people were going to be so daft not to realize that he's no longer a candidate. Mm-hmm. And so we saw that as kind of a form of dirty trick that was happening with him. But what was very interesting is the independent and conservative voters. The polls for some of the more reputable ones look closer, and they look back at it. And these are reputable pollsters that believe they tried everything they could to get an accurate poll. They're like, we feel there was considerable fatigue among conservative voters, or when someone comes up to you with a clipboard coming outside of the grocery store and was asking you, people in America don't usually say they're conservative out loud because they're concerned about, people around them, hollering at them, challenging them. Oh, you're a racist, you're evil. And so people would say, well, I'm undecided, or they would say, I think I'm voting for Biden. I'm not sure, but I think I am. Mm-hmm. And we found out that through the polling process that there were people that were so tired of being polled that they actually took that, which means that they were frightened to freely speak what their real position was. Mm-hmm. And we think that was horrible. And election night showed that among some of the better pollsters were looking at the results and saying, wow, mm-hmm. we really tried to get it right. The only way this works is some of those people either made up their mind at the last second or were truly fatigued at polling, but were concerned about being called racist, evil. If you're a conservative, you're somehow really bad.
Oh, yeah. I got the amount of people I've had who reached out to me during the time that Tom and I were working on the election. People I've known my whole life, some of them from Australia, but also people from the US. I've been here nearly a decade now, who were like, I agree with everything you guys are saying, but I could never say it myself. So you'd be surprised how many people are actually conservative. And it's so amazing to see the shift now where even in liberal strongholds like California, Hollywood Boulevard, you couldn't walk down the street with a MAGA hat on before. You would literally be accosted. People would throw things at you. But now things are definitely changing. It's really good to see.
The world can see it clearly because American football, NFL football, American style football is popular around the world in certain cities. And you've seen the players doing that Trump YMCA dance, and they're not getting shouted out by the commentators. And the NFL league overlords are not telling them to stop. It's because the reaction is too big. And so you've got Hispanic football players, black football players, white football players of mixed origins that are out there. And you've probably seen them on these weekends doing that little Trump dance that he does, mm-hmm. When they play the YMCA song.
People all over America doing that little dance.
Yeah.
Well, you know what they're saying? They're saying they're free to dance. Mm-hmm. And tell all of your viewers in Australia, sir, Americans feel free to dance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is a really interesting point because the Democrats basically campaigned on the idea that Trump and his team were fascists who would restrict your freedoms, even your freedom in the area of abortions. They were the anti-freedom people. But in fact, the blunt reality right around the Western world is that the censorious bunch, the people who tell you, oh, you dare not question this, or you dare not raise that issue, or in polite company you can't talk about, it's the progressives who have wound back on people's freedom to be who they want to be. And you're just alluding to that. So this is a massive cultural shift. Mm-hmm. I guess the first thing I'd want to say is let's not blow it. We've got to make certain that it actually leads to a freer, better, more prosperous society. That's what really counts now. Mm-hmm. But it is a watershed moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we have the culture right now. And one thing I'll say is Dems are usually better marketers than Republicans. So I hope we can keep the culture. But I think we're off on a really, really good track right now. But what you said is so true. It's the woke law, the iron law of woke liberal projection, where whatever they accuse you of, they themselves are actually doing.
Yeah.
Very, very typical for that party, unfortunately.
For
It's
people
very
around the
live in
world,
Australia as well. Very live.
yes. For people around the world who are watching you, and we're hearing Democrats say, "Oh, Trump is going to put people who are, gay. He's going to put them in camps." Well, if he's going to do that, the first person going into a camp, I guess, has to be his Secretary of Treasury, because he's nominated a Secretary of Treasury who is a gay man, not a flamboyant man, a quietly gay man, if you understand what I mean, who lives with his partner in a fairly quiet life and is not seen at gay pride parades, but is very open about his sexual orientation. And the chief of staff is a woman, a very strong woman. So for all the people that say, "Oh, Trump's going to do this, this, and this," the cabinet nominees he's making certainly say different things to the public about the equal opportunity that he's putting in his cabinet, as long as you're capable of fighting the fight and serving the people in that cabinet position with great experience and expertise.
I suppose one of the questions that's intrigued me, though, is that perhaps because it was such an emphatic result, but, there was an enormous focus on the 2020 election. Was it rigged? Was it fair? Who really won? Put all of that aside for a moment because it's ancient history. There was little question this time. Has this put to bed the idea that these things are rigged badly, or is there still a problem there? Because to be fair to the Democrat machine, it has accepted, as far as we can tell from the other side of the world, broadly speaking, the results. Biden, I thought, you've got to give credit where credit's due, invited President Trump to the White House. He said that it would be a peaceful handover. Are we seeing I suppose you'd say, a recovery of some degree of trust? Because, as one American put it to me, a very thoughtful man who I suspect, but I don't know, was going to vote for Trump, he just said, on the list of 20 things I want most from my country, one is an election outcome that people trust.
Yeah. I would say so, yeah. And when you look at the numbers, when you look at the popular vote from the last election to historical ones, and then this one that just took place, there's definitely something funky about those numbers. I mean, what was it, 80 million votes for the Democrats on the popular vote in the year 2020, when typically it's about 65 million. So that's a 15 million difference, and that's one thing that Australia and America's systems are different in that sense, because in Australia, you're legally obligated to vote. Every adult over 18 needs to register, and you have to vote. And so it's much more transparent in that sense, right? Whereas here, you can vote or you cannot vote. The choice is yours. And so, it's hard to say definitively, because there aren't any laws in place that obligate everybody to vote. So who's to say that, the Democratic Party was just energized, but so energized that an additional 15 million people voted? I mean, that's a little bit suspicious to me.
So I think most people in the United States, if you survey them, believe there was, when I say most people, over 50% of the people feel that 2020, something was wrong. Extra votes came from somewhere. Do they definitively know where they were? But people can count. They're like, wait a minute, we go from 62 million to 80 million to 64 million. How? Right?
The math isn't
and
mathing.
So I think the 2024 election was well managed by people like Laura Trump, who drove very, very successful oversight efforts, as well as a battalion of lawyers to review situations in key states. And so there was so much review going on that it was to the benefit of the current election integrity. However, there still needs to be election integrity. Too many states don't require IDs. Mail-in ballots still have issues. I happen to think, and this is just Tom Ellsworth's opinion, that there's probably a percentage point of trickery that was in this election, because we saw certain things happening. We saw examples of an immigrant in Michigan with a ballot they received through the mail, and they attempted to vote, and it was cross-checked and stopped. Good news, it was cross-checked and stopped. Bad news, how in God's name did they get a ballot? Means that the front-end system isn't good. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question directly, there was less of it this election than there was in 2020, but there still is work to do to fully restore public trust that free and fair elections can take place. I'll give you another one. Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis and the Secretary of State were very, very sharp about controls. Florida had 99% of the votes tabulated, presented to media within 2.5 hours of the polls closing.
Wow.
And we called it a 14-point victory for Trump. Now remember, Florida is now one of the top 4 states in total population and votes, as the electoral votes, is what people around the world now understand. Each state has an electoral vote count, and that's really what elects our president. But all those votes in Florida, are you kidding me? And so we saw it on election night, and it's like, if you can get it done that quick, why can't you get it done that quick in Arizona? Why were we waiting a week for Maricopa County, even though it was very clear Trump had won the state?
Yeah.
Why? Why? With one third the ballot and only 3 major cities in Arizona.
Yeah.
Phoenix, Tucson, and Greater Flagstaff. That's it. 3 metropolitan areas and a lot of counties with sparsely, populated, like the Outback, very similar. So why does it take over a week for Arizona to count? 3 cities and some sparse people living in the outer areas. Florida can get all those votes, those millions and millions and millions of votes, one of the top 4 most populous states in the United States, done in 2.5 hours of the polls closing. Yeah. You look at those simple facts, and what conclusion would you reach as a journalist and an independent voice from Australia if you saw those facts?
Well, you would say that it's very, very hard to explain. And probably one of the few things that, because I think there's a terrible problem with the breakdown of trust at just about every level, in relation to just about every level of relationships and people to institutions, between institutions, about government and so forth, right across the Western world. One thing in Australia that we do have is a reasonable degree of trust still in the electoral process. So it's a real issue for America. You're raising the question, and it's up to your countrymen and women to address it. But it is an important one for the restoration of trust and of confidence, which has always been such a key, I think, to American, if you like, influence in the world and capacity to take things forward. We did have a couple of things that arise out of that. We saw an Australian citizen who's living in America able to produce a ballot paper.
Wasn't me, guys. It wasn't me.
No, it wasn't you. No. It was a man. And he shouldn't have had it. He was just illustrating. I don't believe he used it inappropriately, but it was just illustrating. He had a ballot paper. He'd been able to obtain one when he wasn't an American citizen, not entitled to vote.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's no coincidence that all of these states that Kamala Harris won in are typically states that don't require any type of voter ID. And even still, the margins were so much closer than what they were in previous elections. When you look at states like New York, Illinois, when you look at states like California, they were all still so much closer. Now imagine if they also had voter ID laws in place. I just hope, and I'm sure that we will, now that Republicans have also taken the House and the Senate, it's going to be much easier for us to pass legislation now. I just hope that everything is able to be put in place, that when we roll around to 2028, the next election, hopefully every single state in America will require voter ID.
And then there's another even deeper level, which to the technically challenged like me is really a worrying thought. Political scientists Nick Cheeseman and Brian Klass wrote in 2018, that's a while ago now, that there is, quote, a much more direct way to rig elections with computer technology, hacking vital election infrastructure that is housed in servers rather than ballot boxes. This is a serious concern because even in a technologically savvy country such as the United States, election technology is poorly protected from manipulation. That sounds quite concerning to me, and something that would require, I would have thought, great expertise and then a real ability to explain to the voters that they were not being manipulated.
Harry Hursty, that's what I think of, right? He went on PBD Podcast. Didn't he break into one of the, or
Yep.
hack it live on the podcast?
I think we're about to see a next generation of American voting machines because there are voting machines that are being used that are susceptible. But there's also the paper ballot counting at the same time. And I think we're about to see modern security come to elections because people know how important it is. And I think Laura Trump is a proponent of that, and she's pushing for it. But Brian Klass and Nick Jesmond are correct. They're very correct. And that is the risk. And that's why we need to go protect against it. So in the same way that you can see a typhoon coming toward Australia, or you can see a hurricane coming toward Florida, we have the ability with technology to see the storms coming. And I think Nick and Brian are pointing out correctly that there's either a storm coming for a digital fix, or there's a storm coming that's going to be a digital rig. And there's high awareness of this. And our hope is that people like Laura Trump are pushing very hard. They're saying the right things, but we're hoping they get the traction and correctness so that midterm election in 2 years, presidential election in 4 years, that there's increased levels of security and trust. Blockchain technology actually takes care of it, where you have one man, one woman, one vote. It does a very good job of that. So the question is, are we going to have the will to do it properly?
Well, that, I guess, depends in no small part anyway, on just how things play out and the extent to which the new team that the president and the president himself, of course, managed to, I guess, restore confidence in the system and what have you. That'll be very important. We had a very distinguished ambassador to America for a long time, Kim Beazley. He was a former deputy prime minister. His term there was renewed by both sides of politics, very highly thought of. He said one of the worst mistakes that you can make in looking at America is to assume that the vast number of people, and this was quite often portrayed in Australia, evangelicals, for example, an estimated 70 million of them, overwhelmingly in favour of Trump. They're then disparaged. They're, broadly speaking, called trash. They're called deplorables. This is a terrible mistake, Kim Beazley said, to imply that they're not thinking, they're not concerned, they're not good community citizens, somehow they're unworthy. Do you think that this election result might force a rethink there? There might be some honesty on the side of the progressive movement, some humility, a little bit of questioning. We've got this wrong. We were too woke. We were too dictatorial. We were too censorious. We were not worried enough about the real issues confronting middle America. Will it drive that introspection, that thoughtfulness? A bit of humility would be the key.
I think I would say for the everyday person, yes. Can I necessarily say the same for a lot of the institutions, right? The media institutions, the educational institutions, the people in politics on that. I mean, I can't necessarily say that. You know, you've seen some certain people like Mark Zuckerberg really start to possibly reverse course on some of the things that he's been saying. But it's because now he could be targeted now that the Trump administration is in power, right? So are these people, if they are saying that maybe they have turned over a leaf or maybe they're changing their perspective on things, are they saying it because they genuinely believe it, or are they saying it because they now fear the repercussions of what Trump and the administration could possibly bring upon them now? But so far as the everyday person, absolutely. I have friends who were so progressive previously, who they've really had their eyes opened by this entire thing. Not quite to the point of voting for Trump, but to the point where they said, I'm not voting for Kamala and I'm going to vote like Green or vote for a different party. So yes and no, I would say.
Isn't it a reality for the Democrats that they will never win again if they push the same policy approach? If they don't move to actually embrace the economic concerns, the job concerns, the pay concerns, the immigration concerns of ordinary Americans, they actually have to change course?
I don't know. I think that long term, the Dems have an identity problem. And I kind of back off a lot of this nuanced discussion into that. They used to be in favor of the union worker. They used to be, against the billionaires. And now it seems that all of that's gone wrong. And they are the party of not. We are not Trump, without saying what you are. And Americans don't want what's not. They want to know what's next and how next is going to help them live cheaper, live better, and live safer. And so they have an identity issue right now, which goes to, I know you had questions about, what did we see happening with African Americans and Hispanics? The answer is empowerment. They felt empowered by Trump to live and achieve in life. It's that simple. Mm-hmm. And they felt that after generations of pandering to give them handouts, that it started with the men. It started with, a sense of pride. And you saw African American and Hispanic men responding to that pride with him saying, I want to help you find a job. I want to help you find the common decency of going out and being able to accomplish something and feel that. Not all jobs are fun. Some jobs are a real grind. But the Democrats used to be that voice. And I think they have an identity problem now because Trump hasn't stolen their position. Trump honest and truthfully represents that position, and the voters believe it. So it's not that they shift to Trump. It's that they believe they want economic improvement for themselves. They heard it from him and they believed him. Mm-hmm. And so, honestly, if there had been a modern day Ross Perot in this election, a moderate who almost won back in 92, Clinton election in 92. And so he almost won from the middle at a time where Americans were searching for an alternative. Mm-hmm. So Trump was just believable. And so young people, Hispanic people, Black people, the Dems think it's a trick. It's not. It's people voting for the improvement and the support of their own situation.
Mm. There was a fascinating comment in one of my own conversations from a man who said, I'm a Black American and I voted for Trump. I was not going to be told to vote on the basis of my skin color. I'm a working man trying to look after and advance the interests of my family. Mm-hmm. And I voted as a working man worried about his family. I didn't vote on the basis of the color of my skin.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 100%. Yeah. Immigration and economy, inflation. Those were the top three things that we really saw people move on. Every week on The Decision, Tom and I, initially, we did deep dives into each of the different swing states. And we talked about what were the main issues that each of these people, these states, the people of these states were looking at. And for the most part, it was economy, inflation, and then immigration, which was a huge one for so many people. I don't know if people in Australia really understand how much that affected the elections over here. The influx of people, the heat index, the intensity was very strong for these people because it was right on their front lawns. It was actually impacting their day-to-day lives. It wasn't just a talking point, right? And a Republican talking point on media.
In Missouri. A
Yeah.
talking point in Missouri, a debate between friends in Missouri.
Yeah.
But in Arizona, the immigration heat map and index was massive because every person saw it. Every person saw the humanity in camps, was encountered beggars at the ATM, the automat to get money out in front of stores and shops. They saw it. It was there. It made them feel slightly unsafe at certain times with these folks milling about. And so in Arizona, the immigration question had an intensity level of 10. The intensity level in Missouri was 4, because Missouri, middle of the Midwest, yep, everybody's going to debate it, be upset. You see what I mean? They were upset.
Yeah.
But in Arizona, and that's what led Trump. What was Trump's win in Arizona?
5.6, which was the highest. That was the largest margin of any of the states.
Swing states.
Yep. The swing states, yes.
Well, a couple of questions then to start to bring the ship into the dock, so to speak. We know that Latino support from Trump surged from 28% in 2016 to 46% in 2024. He almost doubled his support amongst black voters from 13% to, I think, over 20 in 2024. These are very interesting shifts. I think also that a lot more women voted for Trump than the polls were indicating would be the case. But one interesting question arises out of it for me. Are we seeing a bifurcation here between men and women? We were told that was happening in America, that women were going to vote for Harris, men, swing voters anyway, for Trump. In reality, it doesn't look like it happened that way. Any comments on this bifurcation of men and women on their voting patterns?
I mean, a lot of white women ended up going for Trump, which was kind of surprising to see. But yeah, I mean, the Democratic Party, they ran on abortion. That was their main issue. I mean, that was the number one talking point. That and joy is pretty much all the Democratic Party really had to offer at the end of the day. The heat index of that issue is also high. It's something that gets women very, very emotional. For many of them, they feel like it's like a basic human right. But what's interesting is Trump's not going to take it away from them. It's left with the states. That's what happened when Roe v. Wade got overturned. He's not going to allow a national abortion ban to happen regardless. But that was the talking point that the Democrats used, and it really worked for a lot of women. There are a lot of single issue voters out there, for the most part women, who voted purely on the grounds of abortion. So yeah, there is kind of a divide there, I would say, mostly over that issue. What do you think?
And then afterwards, the news media so eagerly covers a minority, a screaming, upset minority that says, we're going to shave our heads. These women that says, we're going to shave our heads. We're going to not wear makeup. We're going to not date. And we're not going to engage in intimate relationships for 4 years. And so we see that, and I'm like, do you think that you are so important to the rest of the voters that they're going to go, oh no, I need to change my position because you're having a tantrum? No. The rest of the voters look at these women and go, so hundreds and thousands of women are actually going to do this. You're going to shave your head. You're going to forego boyfriends and intimate relations, and you're going to go off in the corner and basically have a tantrum like a child. Well, my conclusion was, wow, that's very interesting. So Trump's already lowering the abortion rate.
True.
Yeah, there's an aspect of that that's very interesting to me as an observer, because Australia's a federal structure just as America is. And what the overturning of Roe versus Wade really meant was that the original judgment was surely correct, that was surely flawed, in that responsibility to make decisions about those things should lie with elected people, not with judges. That was really the decision. And I suspect that a lot of Americans would have understood that it was not a banning of abortion. It was to say that the decision should be made politically by people who are accountable to the voters, unlike judges. And that's why the issue has, in many ways, not been as controversial in countries like Australia. The decisions were made by politicians, not by courts.
Yeah, they like hyperbole. I mean, Trump said once, kind of like as a joke, they were like, "You're going to be a dictator." And he said only on day one. And then the liberal media ran with that story and said, "There's never going to be an election again." And it's the same thing with the abortion. They're very hyperbolic. Yeah.
Yeah. And now look at his And now look at his cabinet and look at who he's nominating. Yeah, this is a dictator. Right. So when you have to run on fear, remember, fear and hyperbole is how you say, not Trump. I'm not Trump. And fear, when you don't have a position, you only have fear and demagoguery. That's all you have.
Yeah.
You just have fear and deception, trying to scare people into voting. Right? Look, there's two ways to make a husband lose weight, right? Compliment him, tell him he's attractive, tell him how inspiring it is when you see him taking care of himself. That works. What also works is when the doctor says you had a mild angina, it was a close call, and if you don't lose this weight, you'll probably be gone within 2 years' time because your heart can't take it. That's logic and reasoning that leads to fear. And so a good man says, all right, time to stop smoking, time to lose some weight, time to get on with it. So fear does work to motivate people. Logic and reason and the complementary does work to motivate people. False fear motivates some people, but they wake up quick and they lose trust. And so suddenly it's like the little child story of the boy who calls wolf, right? Suddenly you can't use it. And I think by the end of the election cycle, they were attempting to use terrible words that have a horrible history, like Nazi. Which personally was offensive to me because I said, you're using Nazi in a casual way when school children should be reading about it in history and regard that word with horror. And you're using it so casually that it's losing its historical meaning. And those, I think, are dark things that happen when you're just trying to scare people with false fear.
I understand. Well put, Tom. I really get that. That's important. Another, just to round this out, younger men and women do appear to be going separate ways. There's a trend for younger men to come back to the centre. They're very likely now to, access a lot of content online. Much of it actually quite high quality stuff. I'd have to say that. I'm a podcaster, and we know about the Joe Rogan thing. But we know a lot of young men are recentering, perhaps because they're sick of being told that every societal ill is their responsibility. They're behind it all. Yep. Young women are still tending to drift left. Does this election throw any light on where younger people are going?
Yeah, I think so. I think the pendulum always swings back, and I think what you said was honestly the answer. Like, men have been demonized, specifically straight white men. Like, somehow we landed up in this weird timeline where that is absolutely the worst thing that you could be in the world. You can do nothing right if you are a straight white man. And at the end of the day, I think people have just had enough. Like, guys have had enough, and the women with common sense have had enough of the rhetoric as well. And so I think the pendulum always ends up swinging back. Things may get out of whack for a little while. We're starting to see a little bit of a course correction. I hope the women follow suit, but obviously it's going to happen with the men a little bit quicker because they were the ones who were demonized, right?
Very interesting perspective. Well, you're two very, very savvy observers of American society. How do you think it's all going to go now? There's been the great change, the great momentous shift. There's a lot of commentary around. It's the high water mark of wokeism is gone. It's time to focus on the real issues for real people. How do you think it will go under President Trump and his new team? What's the feel in America, and how do you personally think it's going to unfold the next 4 years?
Number one, the average citizen, it can be seen, feels free to express their views. That's a good thing. Number two, the financial markets and the job markets seem to be reacting well, which should be good news for the economy and jobs. However, it's very expensive to live, and the energy sector, I think, needs to get ready for what Trump has talked about: drill, baby, drill, meaning increase the supply of oil so that we can sell it to the Chinese. Let's sell oil to the Chinese. Let's sell oil to other places and be an oil power. And every time you reduce the cost of oil, the energy sector has a little less profit, but you're reducing the transportation on groceries. You're reducing the cost of operating farm equipment. You're reducing the cost of plastics. So a barrel of oil has a tremendous benefit in terms of lowering cost for the average American. You're not going to lower labor costs because everybody's salary has gone up and things have happened, some more than others. Teachers still need a raise, in my view. But I think what we're going to see is a lot of adjustments in the economy that are positive. And I want to see the promises kept for the border wall. We have a border wall, but we have doors everywhere. But you require you to knock and to come in properly. The Statue of Liberty stands at Ellis Island in New York with the inscription, "Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuge from your teeming shore. Come." And so we have given a home. There's no American race. American is everyone from everywhere. It is a country and a spirit of freedom. And I believe that Trump is going to allow that embodiment to come forward. And people who are true political refugees will be here. People who are truly seeking asylum from totalitarian regimes will be here. People who have got a criminal record or are not good people, not only are you not coming, but those that are here are leaving. And I think all of that's going to be for the betterment. And my hope is that example becomes an example for Canada, an example for Mexico, an example for other countries to conduct themselves, that it's not an America only, but it is America first that can be followed by other countries that look after themselves and their citizens first. And we all find a way to live in this diverse global economy without the desires of the extreme globalists. And I hope Trump is able to pull this off so that everyone around the world says, this Trump fellow was doing stuff for America, but it seems to have benefited us as well. Funny that. I hope to see that. You see Malay in Argentina just so happy about it. You see responses from like Qatar having the correct response about Muslim Brotherhood and those that were causing harm, Hamas in Gaza, right? They very quickly say, no, we're not going to have any of that here. Why? Because there's a new sheriff in town. His name is Donald Trump, and we're a small country, and we don't want to be negotiated against. So all of these things Muslim Brotherhood and these things, you need to leave, like right now, go. And so those are positive things for the people of Qatar. That's positive. So I hope we see positive influences around the world and the spirit of the individual cultivated in a spirit of liberty and freedom around the world. And everybody realizes that the tariffs are not going to be put in place around the world, but they are going to be a hammer used during negotiations that ultimately are good for many countries, because you could be America first and not be America only, and recognize your place in a citizenship of global countries.
Tom, thank you. That's a very interesting summation. Amy, can I just ask you, as an Australian, you'll be aware that, of course, what Tom's just said would be jumped upon by many people on the progressive side in Australia. I don't know how this will play out in America as, oh, yeah, drill, baby, drill. That's terrific. That just means we're going to ruin the environment. We're all going to be threatened by climate change. What plays first in the minds of the majority of voters? Their own prosperity and well-being and future, or worries about climate change? And there's a related question. Do people actually trust governments anymore to manage an energy transition in the first place?
For me, I'm a little bit disconnected with the people of Australia to really know what the sentiments are like over there. But speaking, from the perspective of liberals and progressives that I have interacted with over here, the climate change thing is definitely something that I think everyone should care about. Climate change, and about not necessarily climate change, but what's the word? Yeah, climate change, but not global warming, right? I think that global warming is something that the left has used to be able to push certain policies that maybe sound good on the surface, but they actually have other agendas backing them, and some of that goes pretty deep state stuff. When you start to look at Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and some of the things that they want to put in place, it's all a part of a larger globalist agenda when it comes to this global warming stuff. I think the environment should be important to everybody. It's actually something I'm quite passionate about. And it makes me really upset that you almost can't say that as a Republican anymore, because people are like, what are you, some liberal progressive? No, there's common sense ways to be able to take care of the environment while also taking care of the economy. And to kind of sum it all up, everything that Tom said, we can help these other countries, we can do all of these things, but you can't pour from an empty cup. We have to make sure that we're good on this end economically, governmentally, from every perspective before we're able to help all these other people, right? And inspire policies in all of these other countries. But I do have faith that that's what will happen. My biggest concerns in Australia are some of the bills that have passed, the digital ID bill, how that could possibly be ushered into the private sector with the restriction of the social media. Now you're going to have to probably upload an ID. Maybe that'll apply to everyone. I'm scared of Australia possibly moving towards being a little bit more of like a nanny state, a surveillance state. And I think that having a leader like Donald Trump in America is something that can hopefully shift the culture enough and kind of wake people up from this mass hypnosis, not just here, but everywhere, so that there is more freedom and prosperity for all. And anything that does have these more diabolical agendas attached are able to eventually be exposed and eventually weeded out as well.
Well, I can't thank you enough for unpacking so much in this conversation. I really appreciate it, and I know that many people will be interested. America is the leader of the free world. Those who attempt to deny it have no idea what they're wishing for. They really don't. So we need a coherent and a strong and a unified America. And you've given us real hope that that can happen. So we'll all watch the next 4 years with very great interest. Again, thank you enormously.
Thank you very much. And to people in Australia that are watching this, we have a message for you. You can change your government, but you have to take the first step. It says, conservatism is not dead. Australian patriotism is not dead. You can push back of the things that are there. It says, as Trump said, fight, fight, fight.
Good on you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.